So welcome everyone to my talk, Considering a Career in AI Safety. I'm Matthew, and over the past few years, I've been searching for a kind of career goal to work towards with my efforts throughout my life. And my current working aim for those efforts is to make a positive contribution to humanity's transition to a world with powerful, intelligent artifacts. And so in this talk, I'd like to reflect on my experience searching for this career goal, which is kind of a work in progress. I don't think I've got everything figured out, but I'll be able to sketch out what I have and what I haven't got figured out during this brief talk. So yeah, I want to do three things. I want to sketch the framework that I think of, the framework that I'm using to kind of make decisions about what goal to adopt. Give a brief overview of AI safety itself, the sort of working towards reducing risks from AI, which is the goal that I'm talking about. And we should have time at the end for me to then talk about a couple of miscellaneous reflections about the field that I couldn't fit into that story. And then time for questions. But also, if you want to interrupt at any point, I'm happy to take questions as we go through. So that's an overview, and start on, if everyone looks at this second board, I'll be able to tell you a little bit about my framework that I'm using. So some time ago, I came across this Venn diagram that I've put up on the second board. I've heard it called Zuzunaga's purpose framework. And it's a framework for deciding on a career that is, according to the namers of the framework, it's a purpose that you can kind of embrace for yourself. And so this is the intersection of the sets of activities that are described as the things that you enjoy, the things that you're good at, the things that the world is willing to pay for you to do, and the things that the world actually needs. I guess there's a lot to say about each of these kind of categories, and the names here are kind of simple, but obviously finding a purpose couldn't be so simple. Yeah, I'm just using this as like a rough sketch of the kind of things that I think I found it helpful when I saw this diagram, the kind of things that are important to consider when trying to search for something to work towards. For example, something that you enjoy doing. Obviously, work doesn't have to be 100% always enjoyable. There could be tasks involved in a job that are not enjoyable, but then there could be other tasks that are enjoyable. It's also difficult to define enjoyment. We had Liam's talk earlier about, for example, type 1 and type 2 enjoyment of activities. I guess this is mostly talking about getting through the day-to-day grind without getting burnt out over a long period of time. What I'm good at is kind of also a little bit fuzzy, like, because you can get good at things by spending time, although that incurs an opportunity cost. So you got to be careful about that. Then there's what the world, as in like what the labor market is willing to pay for. This is obviously a bit weird because it's not about me. It's about the labor market. It would be ideal, for example, if this was aligned with what the world needs, but that's not always the case, I guess. And so it's a pragmatic requirement of the current kind of way that our society is organized, that you need to earn enough to support yourself if you can. And so that's why this is an important requirement. And finally, what the world needs. This is, I think, where this framework is getting a lot of its influence for me from is it's like a call to work on something that helps other people, has a positive impact on the world. So that's this framework. Mathematically, I mean, I'm looking at this as something like a constraint satisfaction problem. So I have to find something in the intersection of these four kind of constraints defining, these constraints defined on the set of activities that I could do for, that I could spend my efforts on. But actually, I prefer a modified version of this framework that looks at the search for what the world needs as I can optimize on that. Because there are some things that the world needs a little bit. There are other things that maybe it needs more. How could I maybe try to optimize my positive impact? I'm happy to leave the other ones as constraints. So I'm searching for a career goal that would involve doing something that I'm reasonably good at, something that I can tolerate or enjoy, something that will kind of provide for my needs to support myself doing the career and the rest of my life. And within those constraints, as much positive impact as I can kind of eke out of my efforts. So that's the framework that I'm going into this with. And the rest of this talk is basically going to be about sort of evaluating or thinking of where I'm up to at the moment, which is thinking about AI safety research in academia as one potential solution to this problem that I'm sort of leaning into at the moment with my search for, with my pursuit of qualifications and work experience. So let me move over to the next board. Oh yeah, I wanted to say before I go to the next board, but about this framework. At this point, and there's actually a couple of solutions to the optimization problem or to the constraint satisfaction problem that have kind of come across my radar as I was kind of completing my studies in undergrad and deciding what to do masters on and that kind of thing. And this is, for example, becoming a software engineer or a data scientist in the tech industry. These are very this is a kind of very standard pathway that people who did my undergraduate degree go on to work in the tech industry like this. For me, in terms of optimizing the impact, I guess that would come down to sort of carefully choosing what company to give my efforts to, or to start a company is also a common pathway. So that's one thing. Another thing is I have a background, some work experience in teaching, and I quite enjoy that. So working in education as an industry appealed to me, as like a science, technology, engineering, mathematics teacher at like a secondary school level, or perhaps doing something more kind of modern, like creating online educational resources or something like that. I haven't put a lot of effort into exploring this avenue, but that's partly because I've been more focused on the third option that came out of this, which is working in academia, which allows me to get a little bit of teaching, which I quite enjoy and I find rewarding, and also to work partly as a researcher, working on kind of solving technical problems, which is something that I quite enjoy and find rewarding as well. So this, for me, academia seems like a working solution, and I'm quite happy with this. And I think I'll be able to find a problem within academia to work on that will be able to hopefully have a good chance of making a reasonable positive impact. But it does remain to decide what that problem is, and that is what I'm going to talk about now: how to pick a problem within academia. And I think maybe you guys have thought about going into the tech industry or education yourselves, but most of the people who visit MetaUni are in academia, so maybe this also, you're maybe following me up to this point, or roughly so. So how to pick a problem once you've decided that you want to work through academia to try and make a positive impact on the world. Well, here I'm going to borrow from an organization called 80,000 Hours, which has what I would call a heuristic for solving this problem, finding solutions to this problem. Look for a field or a problem to work on which has a high scale of potential positive impact if you're able to solve the problem. Secondly, it has high tractability in that it's actually possible to achieve that impact. It's possible to solve the problem or solve part of the problem and get some of the potential impact into actual impact. And third, high neglectedness, which means maybe this problem is not being worked on by as many people as would be optimal, because many problems 80,000 Hours observes often suffer from a kind of diminishing returns effect, where if much more money and effort is put towards solving them, it doesn't necessarily make the same amount of returns as the kind of initial efforts that go towards solving a problem. And the way that I would like to phrase this is something like, is there room for me to make a contribution in this field, or is it kind of crowded such that it won't make a big difference if I put my efforts there? Is there something maybe underserved? Yeah.
Can I make a criticism? Isn't this pretty soulless? What about high beauty? Is this actually a good strategy for finding? I mean, it isn't so clear that you can pursue high impact for looking at things and measuring them for impact, right? Maybe you'd be better off looking for high beauty, and that will in fact lead to high impact.
Yeah, I would take that as like a competing heuristic that you could put up against this heuristic and then see which one came up with better results. I'm not sure if you also mean maybe working on something that is beautiful would be kind of itself very motivating for you or for someone in general. I think that's the case. And I think I want to point out that with this heuristic, I'm factoring out things like enjoyment and good at. So I'm trying to find something that kind of is a good personal fit for me, but then also meets these constraints. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would consider the beauty heuristic to be an alternative, but I guess I find the scale tractability and neglectedness framework a little bit more compelling personally.
Certainly a bit easier to reason about, yes.
Right. Yeah, okay. So also, I'll mention that 80,000 hours, the website, 80,000hours.org, is kind of a useful research in this kind of career, a useful resource in this kind of career search, because this organization basically does research on identifying problems that fit these characteristics and trying to, estimate the scale of potential positive impact, the tractability, and the neglectedness by measuring, how much funding is going into the field. And this is obviously difficult to do accurately, but that's what they're trying to, spend their efforts doing because they found it was a neglected and tractable and potentially positively impactful problem to solve, which is, finding these problems so that then other people can go and make more direct impacts. And yeah, so I found this website, which also has lots of more information about those problems and how you can work towards them. And basically, the process will be something like go through the list of problems on this website, see which ones fit with what you enjoy and what you're good at, because most of them would involve decent pay, especially if they're in academia, and they're selected for positive impact. Although obviously this heuristic isn't going to turn up all the possible solutions. It's just, I only need one solution and then dedicate my life towards that. So I don't necessarily need to know about all of them. Okay, let's look at the next board. So AI safety is one of the recommended kind of problem areas on the 80,000 hours by the 80,000 hours organization at the moment, because their evaluation of it is that it meets these criteria. And my evaluation of the field is that I can see how it potentially meets these criteria. I think tractability is quite uncertain. In other words, I still find it difficult to see how, I still think it might be actually quite difficult to make progress in this, on the problem of AI risk. But I'll come to that more later. For now, I wanted to give you a brief overview of kind of the grand motivations behind trying to solve this problem. And so that's the next board. So I'll sketch out some possible futures that we could see from now until, through the development of very powerful intelligent artifacts. So the possibilities basically are we end up in a world maybe soon. If you attended Dan's talk earlier today, he made the case that general artificial intelligence is coming in the next 10 years with good probability, according to his current estimates. And many people have sort of estimates of when we'll be able to build very intelligent artifacts on the same order of magnitude in terms of the time. It's also possible that we don't do this, but for various reasons that I'm not going to go into, basically because it seems like there's a lot of aligned interests in making this happen. People are working very hard towards it. I think the default situation is that we are going to end up in the top pathway here and build these, if it's possible to build them, which is a little bit more uncertain, perhaps, in my opinion. But we seem to be trying very hard to build these things. So maybe I'm considering this to be like the default outcome. Then, for various reasons that I'm going to go into for the rest of the talk, I think that this transition, having this technology, leads to a lot of potential risks. Basically, my case for why this is potentially important is that it's going to kind of shake civilization to the foundations in many different areas, and very deep to the foundations of how a civilization is built, the assumptions that where we organize our lives around. And I think coming through that transition, there are various pathways that could lead to really bad outcomes, as bad as some kind of dystopian future, or even extinction of the human race. And depending on how bad the dystopia is, I guess one of these could be worse than the other, either way around. Or I guess people hope that, and this is part of the motivation of building these systems, is that they're going to be able to create an immense amount of positive impact in the world and lead us towards the kind of utopias that you see sometimes. Actually, I don't know if I've read a sci-fi utopia science fiction work, but basically, like, anything you can dream becomes possible, because intelligence is such a powerful thing to have, a much larger amount of that you can deploy to any, if we can control it, to sort of deploy it to any purpose that we want. Of course, there are many possible situations in between, and it's very difficult to say what specifically is going to happen, because I think it's difficult to do that, because this is such a radical transformation of our capabilities as a civilization. But I would say that the problem of AI risk is trying to put a thumb on the scale to make us more likely to land further up this ladder by some amount, whatever amount is possible, through our actions. So whatever we can do now to make sure that this transition goes better than it otherwise would is working towards solving that problem of AI risk. And maybe we won't go all the way to sci-fi utopia, but if we can avoid the dystopia or extinction, that would be some kind of success, and that would be a huge scale positive impact. And so that's where AI safety, or the problem of AI risk, gets its potential positive impact from, according to the heuristic on the previous slides. You can see there's a lot of room here, but because the options are so broad, there's sort of conceptually a lot of room here for things to go better or worse, and we might hope that we can draw on some of that potential improvement in the situation as a motivation of the potential positive impact from working on this problem.
Has your opinion about its tractability gone up or down as a result of the AI reading, the safety reading group we did?
I'm not sure that it's moved much. I remember coming into the reading group several months ago with my kind of impression of the work that I'd seen working towards AI safety as being not really addressing the problem at this scale. Like, when we have very, very powerful AI systems, I don't think a lot of people are working on that variant of the problem. The work that I've seen, which has been mainly work that seems to improve AI systems and their impacts on the world for the AI systems that we have today, or I haven't seen a very convincing case that something will kind of scale to these much more powerful systems. And so I would say that part of the reason that I'm worried about the tractability is that I don't really see the path to impact, and I think that still needs to be worked out by AI risk folk. And yeah, I guess I'll come to that in a moment, but I wanted to next talk a little bit about these risks and why I think this problem is so fundamental. Yeah, I should also say, I just said I haven't seen much that gets to what I see as the core of the problem, which I'll talk about in a moment. When I say I haven't seen much, I haven't looked at that many papers more than what we've looked at in the reading group, which is maybe a dozen, or on the order of a dozen papers. So I've still got some reading to do before I sort of settle my judgments on the work that's been done. so far. On this first board, I want to talk a little bit about why I've got three reasons why I think the invention of intelligent artifacts, highly intelligent artifacts, could be so kind of foundationally important and impactful. It's a little bit harder to argue whether or not it will be positively or negatively impactful in 2 out of 3 of these cases. But the thing is, if you have these kind of radical transformations, I think it's maybe this is because maybe this characterizes me as a pessimist, but I think at least there's reason for concern if we're going to shake things up so much that we might not come through on the other side. I think the case has to be made that we're going to come through safely rather than the other way around. Anyway, so
conservative, not a pessimist.
Okay, well, yeah, okay, sure. So first one, this is the kind of most straightforward story of AI risk that I see, which is basically the killer robot scenario, or something like the paperclip scenario or something like that. But I'm going to try and abstract it a little bit and say it like this. So let's say we invent this highly powerful, this highly intelligent artifact, and it has subtly misaligned goals. So often when we build these systems, we build them with some kind of objective to work towards, and that's going to be the system's goals. And people talk about in AI safety the alignment problem, which is can you make sure that that objective that the system is working towards is actually what the designers want it to be? And so probably, for example, the system is going to do what the designers intended for it to do. So it's a little difficult to formalize this because part of that equation is what the designers intended for it to do, which is like a fuzzy social, philosophical side. It's not just a technical problem. But yeah, it creates a problem because if you have this misalignment, and you have an intelligent system that has this goal, then that system suddenly becomes an adversary to you, the designers. So what you want is what you intended, what it wants is something else, and you're now in competition with this thing. And so it suddenly becomes difficult if the system is powerful enough and has an initial kind of position that like it's not in some kind of simulation, it has some element of control. It's not going to want to relinquish that control to you because its goals are different from yours. And unless it's sort of specifically designed to be subservient towards your goals, it has reasons to do things like prevent you from trying to shut it down, prevent you from trying to change its goals, because that would prevent it from achieving its current goals. So it doesn't currently want that. And because we're assuming that it's a very intelligent system, possibly more intelligent than you, it's difficult to see why you are going to win in that contest between you and the agent. So in this, this is the story. This is sort of the structure of the story of the paperclip optimizer that is built for the single goal of maximizing the production of paperclips for a paperclip manufacturing company. But the designers forget that that is not what they really want. It's not the only thing they really care about in the universe. So when this system becomes more powerful than them and then turns the entire world, including them and their families, into paperclips, they maybe feel some regret, whereas the AI goes on to colonize the universe with paperclips. Okay, so that's the straightforward story. Not everyone buys this story, although I think, I guess, it is, there are some assumptions, like it has to be an agent that is actually more intelligent than you, such that it would be a dangerous adversary, and it has to be put in a position where it is not kind of trivial to stop it from doing that, and it has to have misaligned goals that are actually, they don't have to be so misaligned, because I think sort of any difference in goals, if the difference in intelligence is kind of large enough, will become reason for being an adversary on those differences. But yeah, there's a lot of discussion in the field about the plausibility of this story and ways to kind of attempt to solve the alignment problem, and ideally ways to solve it for super intelligent systems. That's a whole part of the literature. Even if you don't buy this as a risk, though, I would argue that there's two other reasons why the invention of, let's say we solve the alignment problem, and so this first dot point is not a problem. I would say that there's two other kind of fallback reasons why we can expect risks from powerful intelligences. The first of those is that if you have such powerful systems, depending on how they are controlled, we're assuming now that they're controlled, but depending on how they're controlled within human society, that may lead to essentially an arbitrary concentration of power in terms of wealth, ability to, intelligence is a source of power in military conflict, in sort of economic conflict and the generation of wealth. Wealth then brings power. So it's sort of straightforward to see how if you have a monopoly on the most powerful intelligence in the world, you can potentially become a very powerful political actor. And as far as I'm aware, although I don't have a background in political science, but my intuition is that this goes to the assumptions that are underlying all of the way that we have organized our social and political structures as a society, which is all based on kind of human scale power or groups of human scale power. And sometimes groups of humans are incredibly powerful, but they're not always that much more intelligent. And when you're talking about intelligent artifacts, it becomes possible to consider situations where we unlock even greater concentrations of power than we've ever seen. Actually, I was talking to ChatGPT about this, and I asked, are there examples of really large concentrations of power in history, and where this has led to negative consequences? And then I also asked it where it's led to positive consequences. And I was so this is ChatGPT is obviously more widely read in history and philosophy than I am, and it gave me some interesting examples. So the examples in the case of negative impacts were of the form, the Nazis and various other dictators throughout history that perpetrated atrocities on their enemies. And I guess you could also add to that any situation where you had some kind of war between two groups, and the more powerful group is able to kind of destroy the other group. This is what happens when power is unbalanced. Although it did also mention in the positive impacts side, examples where if there's a dominant source of power politically nearby, that can actually lead to times of peace. Like, I think the example I remember, because I knew a little bit about it, is the Pax Tokugawa from Japanese history, where basically this shogunate comes in and rules all of Japan, unifies all of Japan, and ends a period of kind of lots of war. And now you have a kind of place where culture can kind of thrive. For, I think this one lasted over 200 years or something. So, and there are many other examples of that kind of peace where you had some kind of hegemonic control politically, and so there was less conflict at that level and maybe less disturbance. And not everyone was better off in the situation, but maybe largely society was. So this one, I'm not so sure that it's going to, shaking the foundations of our political structures is going to shake out necessarily poorly, but I guess there is risk that it could. And that's, it would be on us then to try and find ways that we can make sure we end up with the good kind of concentration of power rather than the bad kind, or we end up without a concentration of power if we thought that was going to be a problem. And that brings me to the third point, which is, let's say that even if we don't end up with a concentration of power, let's say we end up with perfectly freely distributed, equally distributed, open source wonderland of, Richard Stallman's dream. Everyone is able to access and control the AI and very liberally kind of do it, and it all works great. There's still a problem, I think, that's foundational. Foundational risk comes from this. Because in the best case scenarios that I hear of the development of AI and gaining access to this technology, we end up being able to rapidly increase the pace of our economic development. The doubling time in terms of our economic productivity reduces to, depending on who you ask, this could happen very rapidly or it could take a longer time, but eventually we end up with some kind of ridiculous timelines, ridiculous time periods in between doubling our economic output. And so I guess it's implied that in this world, things are changing really rapidly because we have so much power that we're able to kind of just do whatever we want. And things become much more unstable from like a technological point of view. And I think that this is maybe a little bit more shaky than the other ones, but I think that our culture and species is kind of built on being able to adapt to things that happen slowly. Our species, in terms of evolution, which only has like a finite rate of adaptation to changes in the environment, and more rapid changes than that, we just can't physically adapt faster enough because, you know, we have a certain life cycle, and it takes several life cycles for adaptive changes to come through. Our culture also has means of kind of coping with changes that come, but I'm not convinced that those are currently cut out for the kind of changes that we might see in this future. And just thinking how to put this. Maybe we kind of revolutionize our society and our culture in a way that enables it to deal with a world of very rapid changes happening. Every few years, the world becomes completely different, or maybe we decide that we don't want it to go so fast, and so we put the brakes on or whatever. But maybe that works out, but maybe this just tears the whole thing apart. And that's what I'm worried about and what I want to investigate the possibility of, and then if it is a possibility, find out how to make it not a possibility. So that's my case for risks from the development of highly advanced artificial intelligences. I'll pause for questions, and I also see Dan seems to be trying to say something in the chat that's getting blocked.
I was joking that your career plan is to form the Singleton, but it kept getting censored.
As in, so, I should be the Singleton? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that was, well, your example from the Tokugawa shogunate, or the similar examples in China, of course, sort of like Matt looks around and thinks, well, you know, maybe we should have an era of hegemonic control and then things will be not so bad. And who better, though I'm not employed currently.
Right, yeah. Well, maybe that's where I'll end up. Like I said, this is not a fully thought out career plan. There's still room for that to happen.
That's right. Well done. Clap.
So I'll wrap up now because the last few slides are not as detailed. We've already basically talked about this one, the AI risk is a problem, part 2. The scale, it seems like high, although it's not clear how much of this is actually tractable and how much we can actually affect the development or the impacts of the development of AI. This is the question, I guess, and I think it's worth looking into more. The neglectedness I haven't talked about yet, but I will mention that I haven't looked as much into this, but what I read on a website like 80,000 Hours that does look into this is that when they estimate the amount of funding or the size of the field in terms of the number of full-time researchers, it's on the order of magnitude of like 400 full-time researchers at the moment, or whenever this was estimated in the last year or two. Compared to what, I don't have the numbers on hand, but what I think most of us would be familiar with, the scale of AI capabilities research, as in working on developing AI systems and making them have new capabilities and making them better at performing better and stuff, which is grand, staggering from my perspective. So neglectedness seems high, according to the experts at 80,000 Hours. And yeah, it's certainly true that the literature is nowhere near as vast. And I actually personally feel a little bit more comforted by that fact because if I carve out a reasonable sized literature, I feel like I can kind of just take one bite out of it at a time. Whereas trying to understand what's going on in AI seems like a much harder problem for me as like a personal approach to research. But anyway, that's a bit of a side note. I'll come to the final 2 boards, which is about some reflections on the field. And the first of these is that I would say that AI safety, this AI risk problem, all of this that I'm trying to solve can be summed up by this kind of oversimplified equation, which is we want to take AI plus humanity, and we want to have the outcome of that be good, or at least not disastrous. And we want to solve for AI in this equation. So what type of AI do we have to build? How do we build it? What do we have to do to make sure that this equation comes out good? So that brings me to sort of thinking about who I think is needed to work on this problem. And this is not an exhaustive list, but some people that it's recognized already that AI engineers and scientists have a role because they're the ones designing the AI. So I can add a little, I don't think I've done much annotating, but here's an annotation. AI engineers and scientists are the one building the AI. And this is sometimes referred to as technical AI safety. Although I think it's a little bit of an oversimplification to put this here on the diagram. Because let's say down the bottom, mathematicians and computer scientists would also probably want to say that they're working on technical AI safety. But a lot of the work that I see classified under this heading of technical AI safety work corresponds to AI engineers and scientists looking for technical solutions they can build into their AI systems or around them in order to make them better. But you can't solve this equation without understanding the rest of the equation. And that equation involves humans and good. And that is the domain of philosophy, political philosophy, and also moral philosophy. It's the domain of social and political scientists. So this is a kind of softer part of the equation and is also necessary to, in my opinion, it's also necessary to have contributions from these folk. I sometimes see a field here, sort of as opposed to technical AI safety, AI governance, which is about how to create governing structures around the development and the deployment of AI systems, especially the emphasis on systems with the assumption that they're going to increase in capability in the near future. But I don't think AI governance, not that I have basically no familiarity with the details of what work goes on in this field, but I haven't seen or heard of anything yet that is looking at some of the problems that I mentioned on the previous board about, for example, the kind of risks that can come from arbitrary concentrations of power from AI, or the kind of risks that come from rapid technological change, and whether or not society is, it just feels to me, while I'm kind of pontificating about the possible benefits of working on AI safety, like this kind of calls for some kind of reimagining of the social contract of the way that we organize society to accommodate this new development. And I haven't seen that work talked about as much. And I would say that's also needed, aside from AI governance, like something more grand perhaps is needed. The final point here, mathematicians and computer scientists. I put a question mark here because this is where I would classify myself. More so my allegiance is here than with the AI engineers and scientists, because I find myself more easily able to work on kind of small resource, pen and paper problems with abstract math and stuff compared to building the systems. Although I think that's something I want to develop the skills in as well. I'm struggling to find concrete areas where these kind of skills can make contribution to this field. And so this is actually one problem, apart from the tractability issue. This I would say is the other main issue that I have with this in my thinking of adopting this as a career path, is that I'm not sure what I can bring to the table in terms of, what would I write a paper on in order to succeed by the kind of metrics of the academia, kind of the academic culture, which is an important part of maybe gaining influence and access and those kind of things. So I don't exactly have a solution here. I have seen some work on what's called sometimes agent foundations, which is people re-examining kind of the foundational assumptions in things like decision theory and logic, and yeah, those are two examples, to kind of take into account that agents that are developed will be acting within the real world, and this sometimes changes the kind of correct answers, and the classical models in decision theory and logic, for example, people point out don't always work in this kind of more realistic setting when you relax some of the simplifying assumptions that are made in the classical theories. we had a talk on that in the AI safety seminar, and if anyone's interested, we could talk about it more, and I can send you a blog post that lists some examples. That's one area. I'm not so sure that it's for me, but it's one that I'm considering. And I'm also looking for others. Finally, 2 notes on the AI safety field, 2 more notes. One is that I've heard this field described as pre-paradigmatic, as in there is not yet a dominant paradigm. It's a young field, having only kind of had a literature that dates back, apart from maybe precursors that weren't maybe consciously working in this field, a literature that dates back maybe 15 years. The thinking is somewhat fragmented, and the literature as well. And I think this, for me, is, this is a huge challenge. This is part of the reason why it's not clear the tractability or what a mathematician / computer scientist can contribute. But on the other hand, I think that I am hopefully, one of the things that I like doing, and I think I have a comparative advantage in maybe, is reading maybe under conceptualized work and kind of sorting it out and figuring out what are people actually trying to do, taking note of what seem to be the implicit or explicit motivations of people and making those more clear and presenting them. So I think maybe I could be part of the workforce that cleans up the goals of the field and the research agendas, and sort of lays solid foundations for future work to kind of build on with clarity and without equivocation and confusion. So I hope that that's the kind of thing that I can work towards at this stage of this field. Maybe I'm the kind of person who's needed. And finally, it's unavoidable, or it's not the word I mean. It's obvious that it's one of the first things you notice, that this field is kind of, people react to it differently. Some people consider this to be some kind of comical thing. How could you ever have risks from AI, seeing as we build them? Of course, we'll be able to control them. I don't buy those kind of, what I see as maybe a little bit blasé or negligent attempts to sort of dismiss this, although I would love to think this was not a problem. Anyway, yeah, this is sort of a divisive topic, or it's a little fringe to care about AI safety, although maybe that's changing, especially with the recent obvious increases in capabilities. I guess the future will tell. The reason that I put this here is because I think it's worth taking note of, if anyone is considering working in this field, that I think it's going to be, maybe, at least for now, a bit of an uphill battle against kind of the academic culture. And this might make it more difficult to succeed by traditional academic standards, because you might face a little bit of skepticism about this being even really worth doing. So that's all the notes that I had, and I'm happy to spend the rest of the time taking questions.